Hello! It's time. It's time for part two of Words of Radiance. So, last time I was so distracted by all the really mind-blowing revelations about the Parshendi in the interlude chapters at the end that I kind of forgot to talk about the big thing that happened at the end of Kaladin's last chapter, which was obviously meant to be like the biggest thing in that whole part of the book. Um, which just goes to show you there's so much going on in this book that there can be multiple things that I can just talk about for a whole video within a single part of the book. So I have to make some choices. And here I'm glad that I forgot to talk about Amaram's arrival, because not much happened in that regard in this part of the book, in this next part of the book, so it's not like that story has significantly moved forward, but I do have more thoughts on it now than I did before. So I do have more to say about that, but we'll get to that. I'm going to start by talking about the character I have less to say about, but who I find much more compelling personally, and that is Shallan. So, I've made no secret that Shallan is my favorite character so far. I relate to Shallan quite a lot. I relate to especially the fact that her first instinct is to be quick-witted and insult people, to use her intelligence to insult people. And this is like a gut reaction she has. Like, the first thing her brain does is come up with a witty comeback to everything people say. And it's not always smart to actually say those things. In fact, it usually isn't. And it gets her in lots of trouble. And I find that relatable. The number of times I've gotten my ass kicked in middle school, especially, the number of times I got my ass kicked in middle school by people much bigger and much stronger than me because I couldn't resist mouthing off stupidly at them, is too high to count. So, while that's not really a huge problem for me anymore, because I'm better at controlling that impulse now, when I was a little kid, who thought he was smarter than everyone else around him, that was very much relatable to me. So, I love Shallan. And I'm very happy to see that Shallan appears to be developing into the most interesting character of this book, which makes sense because this is her book, quote unquote. Although we haven't really gotten as many flashbacks from her. We've only gotten like 2 brief flashbacks, so it's not following the model of the first book exactly, because like half of the first book was Kaladin flashbacks. And I kind of like this. I like the fact that we're getting these like shorter and more mysterious flashbacks from Shallan, and it makes sense because these are memories that she's blocked out. These are memories that she is refusing to think about, and so it makes sense that what we would be getting from her aren't really like full-fledged, fully developed memories like we did from Kaladin. They're these weird snippets that hint at things without giving us full context, such as and I don't really have any theories about this because we haven't been given enough yet, but I just want to note the fact that apparently Shallan's mother's soul is in a lockbox behind a painting, or at least was, and Shallan could see it through the wall. I can't even begin to guess what the hell that is. I have no idea what's going on there. So I'm not even going to try. I'm just pointing out that I've taken note of that and am completely confused. However, the main thing with Shallan in this particular section of the book is her learning to use her powers, first of all. So she's starting to learn how to control her powers. She's the way she influences the deserters, one of whom is Gaz, by the way. That's a really interesting detail. I'll talk about that more later. But the way she uses her powers to influence the deserters is really, really nice and really cool and really clever, but also really, really in character for her because she's not because unlike Yasna, who would have used her powers to kill someone, Shallan uses her powers to inspire people. Um, it's actually like that whole scene where she encounters the berserkers. What? No, the deserters, and the way they leer at her, the way she feels that's under threat. It feels like an intentional parallel to the scene in book 1 where Yasna kills the 4 guys in the alley. Uh, and this is like, oh, here's Shallan being put into a similar situation, but using her powers to resolve it in a very different way. That's in line with how she didn't like Yasna's solution in the first book. So yeah, that was a nice touch. But then we also get the character of Tin or Tyne, who, boy, I had a bunch of thoughts about Tin and about where I thought this story was going. Like half of my notes are just thoughts about Tin, and all of them were invalidated by the last chapter of this book, of this part of the book. Because she's dead now. Shallan killed her with a shard blade. Uh, so I was 100% sure that Tin was going to remain a constant presence throughout this book, and that Shallan's story in this book would be defined by having to sort of juggle this identity that she presented to Tin with her real identity, and having to like live these 2 separate lives once they got to the war camps. That she would have to simultaneously present herself honestly as she is, with the truth, to the Colons, while weirdly enough lying to Tin about the fact that she wasn't lying to the Colons. I thought that was gonna be the premise here, but apparently not. I still don't know where Shallan's story. I still don't know if Shallan will be entirely honest with the Colons, especially now that she's making plans to meet with the I forgot the name. The group that Tin was working for, who killed Yasna and who her father was working with. I don't remember their name, but anyway, I still don't know if she will tell the Colons about that, if she'll work with them to manipulate the bad guys, or if she will sort of present herself as just, hey, I'm here to marry Adolin, hi, and then sort of sneak out on the side to do her spy stuff. I also wonder how Kaladin will react when he realizes who Shallan is. Because the first... But I should talk about that. The first meeting between Kaladin and Shallan, chef's kiss. Perfect scene. Perfect chapter. Absolutely hysterical. I love that that's how that went. And I'm kind of sad that Tin is dead now, because it means that Shallan probably won't have to pretend to be a horn-eater for Kaladin's sake once she gets to the camps. And I wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see more of those absurd interactions. But it's probably for the best. The book shouldn't get too distracted by dumb humor stuff like that. But I enjoyed it. It warmed my heart. So that's all I have to say about Shallan and Pattern. Pattern is developing into quite an interesting character. Very different relationship between Shallan and Pattern than between Kaladin and Syl. And I'm also pretty interested by the fact that Shallan is more open about Pattern's existence. So both on the ship, she was openly, like, all the people on the ship were aware of Pattern, and she was like, oh yeah, I'm just studying this spren, and talking to it. And now, at the end here, when Shallan is asked by the other people, hey, whose voice summoned us to help you, she's like, oh, that was my spren. And like she's interestingly enough way more open about it than Kaladin, which I wonder how that's going to go when they actually meet properly, because I wonder if she's going to be open about Pattern to Kaladin, and if she is, will Kaladin see that as an invitation to be open about Syl? I don't know. Anyway, the other thing I want to talk about in regards to Shallan's chapters is not actually about Shallan. It's about Gaz and Tlokov. Tlokov, I guess? The slaver? I guess that's how you pronounce his name? That's too many consonants. Jesus. But yeah, Tlokov and Gaz are both interesting because they are recurring characters from a different character's storyline. So they were characters in Kaladin's storyline who are now appearing in Shallan's storyline in seemingly completely unrelated roles. And I like when stories do that, but I also find it interesting because it feels like another thing that Sanderson has learned from Robert Jordan, because the Wheel of Time is full of characters like that. Bail Domon, Valan Luca, there's a bunch of these like minor characters who are usually sort of characters who travel around a lot and help the other characters travel as well. Bail Domon is a ship captain who often ferries the main characters of the Wheel of Time from place to place. Valan Luca is a circus owner and characters often travel with his caravan. And that kind of made me think, like, when Tvlakov appeared, that made me think of specifically Valan Luca from the Wheel of Time. Which might be part of the inspiration there. But Tvlakov is obviously a very different case, because Tvlakov is a slaver, and I was worried for a while that... Not worried, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that Shallan would be mostly fine with... In fact, I'm kind of confused by that now that I think about it. Let me back up. So I was, at first, wasn't a big fan of the idea of Shallan just palling around with a slaver, because I was like, that's a bit morally horrible of you, Shallan. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh, right, Shallan is lesser nobility in a slave society. She's fine with slavery. She has slaves at home. Like, slavery is not something that she would find repugnant. She's like, yeah, oh yeah, a slaver, that's like a profession, sure. And it's interesting to see her opinion of that change over the course of her time with Flakov. Because when she first meets him, she's like, oh yeah, he's a slaver, like that's, like, it's a bit of a seedy profession and I don't trust him, he might try to enslave me, but like the fact that he's a slaver isn't in itself, like, disgusting to me. It's like, that's a bit of a nasty job, but someone's gotta do it. But then by the end, she basically steals all his slaves and sort of frees them. And here is the interesting part. In the hands of a writer less committed to consistent characterization, Shallan might have just straight up freed the slaves. You know, she could have done a Daenerys and been the great liberator. But that wouldn't have made sense, because again, Shallan doesn't think slavery is like an inherent, abhorrent evil. Shallan is like, yeah, I don't really like the idea of having slaves, like, it kind of rubs me the wrong way, but, like, they are slaves, like, they you can't just free them. And obviously she should, like, the morally correct thing to do would be to free them, but that's not how she thinks about it, and it makes sense that she doesn't. It makes sense that instead she does this thing where she essentially is very, very generous with them and pays them a lot, and has a lot of that money automatically go towards paying off their slave debt, so that I think she says that, like, in a couple of years they're going to be free. So essentially, she gets a bunch of slaves and is like, oh, I'm going to keep these slaves as my slaves, but like only for a while. And they're gonna be freed in a while, but they have to earn it. Which again, in the context of our world, that would be morally reprehensible. But it is kind of the best you can hope for from a character who was raised the way Shallan was, as a lesser noble in a slave society. So I like that. I like that. I like that Shallan doesn't have the kind of morality that people in our world might. I like that she is portrayed pretty realistically for someone who was raised in this society. Speaking of which, her reaction to the idea of the light changing, the color changing eye drops. When Tin shows her that there are eye drops which can make a light eye's eyes darker, and Shallan's immediate response is horror at the idea that someone could do the opposite. The idea of a dark eyes being able to make their eyes lighter horrifies her to her core. And that's really interesting, because that's like that shows you how much the basis of the class, how much built into the class structure of this world is the idea of this fundamental difference between light eyes and dark eyes. Like, a light-eyed person is viscerally horrified at the idea that a dark-eyed person could ever be like one of them. And again, that's like that reaction from Shallan is horrific and disgusting from our perspective, but it makes perfect sense, and within the setting, it's the only response she would have. I imagine even Dalinar would have that response to that particular idea, and he's like the least bad Light Eyes, I guess, we've met. He's still pretty bad when it comes to, like, he still does very much believe that Light Eyes should be above Dark Eyes. He doesn't question that. But he is more open to the idea of some level of equality, at least with individual Dark Eyes. But, you know, I'm pretty sure he still owns slaves, for example. Anyway, that's a nice segue to talking about the Amaram thing. We're done with Shallan. Moving back to the war camps. Amaram is here now, and even though he came at the end of the last section, nothing has happened yet, which I find is an interesting choice. Essentially, the book is building tension around Amaram. Sanderson is refusing to give any sort of confrontation or resolution to the Amaram thing for quite a while. Kaladin even tells Dalinar, and you expect, oh, this is going to lead to something. Like, either Dalinar will follow through with this and do something about Amaram, or he will completely outright reject Kaladin's accusation and side with Amaram. But no, he doesn't do either. It's just, like, Dalinar and Kaladin both kind of pretend that conversation never happened. And I think that's interesting, because Sanderson is doing something very clever with Amaram and Dalinar. So, the thing Dalinar did to win over Kaladin's trust, which is give up a shard blade to save Kaladin and his friends. That is an event that seems perfectly calibrated to be the opposite of what Amaram did, because Dalinar saved Kaladin's friends by giving up a shard blade. Amaram killed Kaladin's friends to get a shard blade. It's literally the same. I believe Dalinar framed it as a trade. Like, I traded a single priceless item for however many thousand human lives, which are also priceless. So it's the same trade but backwards. And Kaladin hasn't necessarily explicitly made this connection in his head yet, but this makes the whole Amaram situation the perfect test for Dalinar. This is like the ultimate. This whole situation with Amaram being in the war camps is like carefully designed by Sanderson to give Dalinar the chance to either prove to Kaladin that he genuinely is better than other Light Eyes, or prove to Kaladin that at the end of the day he is just another Light Eyes. What he does about Amaram, assuming he believes Kaladin, is maybe the most important choice that he can make in terms of how Kaladin will perceive him going forward. And in a lesser story, I can imagine this feeling forced. This whole Amaram situation is so perfectly designed to force Dalinar into this decision that in a lesser story I would be like, that feels a bit forced, like you just kind of contrived this situation for the sake of Dalinar's character development. But here it feels natural. It makes sense. It makes sense that Amaram is here. It makes sense that Dalinar would react the way he has so far, which is that he's not reacted, because this whole situation is like he feels. Both he and Kaladin feel, I think, on an instinctive level, that what he does about the Amaram situation is like going to define his relationship with Kaladin forever. And that's why they're both kind of pretending that conversation didn't happen, because whatever Dalinar does is going to have a ton of weight. And I think that must be weighing heavily on both Kaladin and Dalinar, and they don't want to think about it right now. So that's really all I have to say about Dalinar. Before I get to Kaladin, I'm just going to mention Adolin. Adolin is getting a bit more interesting. He's getting a bit more depth as a character, with the duels and his burst of anger and violence during that first duel, his frustration with supposed friends who won't be seen with him in public because of his dad's reputation. So I think Adolin might be maybe building towards a bit of a dark turn. He's also still very dismissive of Kaladin, and I'm curious if that's going to change at any time. I'm curious if Kaladin is ever going to convince Adolin that he is trustworthy. But yeah, I just want to say that Adolin looks like he might have some potential to become an interesting character, because so far he's been the only uninteresting point of view character in this series. And I'm looking forward to seeing him become more than he is so far. Okay, Kaladin. So, Kaladin and Seth. That's not a confrontation I was expecting this soon. I mean, it was obvious that they were going to confront each other at some point, given that they have the same powers, and they're apparently the only people in the world who do. But I was not expecting that to just happen randomly, like, less than halfway through the second book. And I have a lot of thoughts about where Seth's story is going, which I'll get to, but first I'll talk about Kaladin. So, Kaladin realizing that he's not the only person who can do what he can do is, I think, going to play a big part in pushing him to tell Dalinar. And I hope he does soon. Well, I don't think here's my prediction for this book. I think that Kaladin won't tell Dalinar the full truth until Dalinar does something about Amaram. So I think that Dalinar is going to slowly build up towards doing something about Amaram. And when he does, that will earn Kaladin's trust sufficiently for Kaladin to tell him the truth. I could be proven wrong in literally the next chapter. Like, for all I know, in the next chapter, Kaladin just tells him. But I don't think so. I think this is sort of where this arc is going. So Kaladin is but Kaladin is already pretty close to telling him. Like every time it comes up, Kaladin is closer and closer to coming clean about his powers. Because Syl is also pushing him. And the reason Syl is pushing him is because Syl is obsessed with honesty and truth and stuff like that. Which is going to be interesting when Kaladin and Shallan meet. I imagine that Syl and Pattern are not going to get along. Like, at all. Which is going to be fun. Because they're both pretty juvenile in their, like, outlook and behavior, so having them clash is going to be very amusing for me. So Kaladin has direct communication with what appears to be the Stormfather, who is also communicating with the Parshendi, interestingly enough. Even though the Parshendi view him as a traitor, he appears to be actively helping them in their form transformations. So clearly there's more to the Stormfather than the Parshendi think. But it's also now been confirmed, which I wasn't entirely sure about, that the Stormfather is just a spren, and is not, as I had sort of been wondering, actually either honor or odium. So, as far as I can tell, the Almighty was honor, and honor is dead, I think. I don't think the Almighty, the entity that speaks to Dalinar in his visions, I don't think that is just a spren. I think that is honor himself. Maybe? At least that's what I think is happening there. And the Stormfather is a spren. A very powerful spren. Essentially like a lesser deity, I guess. Sort of like the Night Watcher, who we still haven't met, but who's been mentioned. I think. I'm still trying to get the cosmology of Roshar straight, but I think that's sort of the tier list. So you've got the three major gods, odium, cultivation, and honor, and then you have like sort of these greater spren who rule, who are under them, but are above normal spren, and those greater spren include the Night Watcher and the Stormfather. And maybe the Almighty, I'm still not sure. I'm still not sure if the Almighty is honor or merely a spren of honor like the Stormfather. Unclear. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Kaladin and his whole story. And the final thing I want to talk about here, the final major thing, is Seth. Because Seth had a really, really interesting reaction to Kaladin revealing his powers. And that was that Seth was horrified by the fact that Kaladin has these powers. And he was specifically horrified because from his dialogue, I could construe that what actually happened... Sorry about that, someone is sawing something outside. I hope that doesn't mess up the video too much. From Seth's reaction, you could construe that the reason Seth is a truthless is in some way because he claimed that the Radiants were coming back, and this was treated as a lie. And so now that he knows that Kaladin is a Radiant, or a potential Radiant, he might no longer think that his sentence of being truthless is justified, and he might no longer obey Teravangian, was that his name? He might no longer feel bound to obey the person who holds his stone, which is going to be interesting. I think Seth might be about to break free from his oath, which is interesting because I was not expecting that to happen this early in the story. Like, it was obviously going to happen eventually, but I was expecting more time to pass. But maybe it's gonna happen now. I'm looking forward to seeing why he was punished so severely for apparently just claiming that the Radiants are back. That seems a bit much. And I'm also curious about where his powers come from, because Syl makes it pretty clear that he is not bound to a spren like Kaladin or Shallan. So, and we also have Seth POV chapters where it's clear that he doesn't have a spren to communicate with. So, I'm really curious about what's going on there. So that's all the major things I wanted to talk about, but there's a couple of little things I want to talk about too. So, in regards to shard blades, two interesting things happen in this part of the book. One, Syl is horrified by shard blades. She considers them abominations. And there isn't really any indication as to why, except that she thinks it has something to do with the Radiance and what the Radiance did. Don't know what's going on there, but we'll get to that when we get to it. And the second thing about that is that when Shallan summons her shard blade at the end, this happens. So Shallan thinks 10 heartbeats, but for her, it didn't have to be 10, did it? And then she sort of backs away from that thought, like she always does when she thinks about her past, and she does the 10 heartbeats thing anyway. But apparently Shallan has Shardblade related powers that go beyond simply owning a Shardblade. And I'm curious about what's going on there. I feel like that's... Like, I can't wait to see more of Shallan's backstory, because I feel like there's... Like, clearly Shallan has had a Shardblade and some form of powers for way longer than this story has actually been going on. And she should not... And clearly she has known this for a while, and that's why she wasn't as surprised in the first book when crazy magic stuff started happening, because, like, she's clearly experienced some weird stuff before. And I'm curious to see more about that. Just like I'm curious to find out if Kaladin had any powers before the first book, because I'm curious about when exactly Syl bound herself to Kaladin, because I don't think we know that exactly yet. And the final thing I want to talk about is Zahel. So Zahel, or Zahel, is definitely not a regular person. So Zahel is either one of the heralds, or some kind of surviving radiant, or he's one of Hoid's friends, like one of the people like Hoid who apparently move between the worlds. I still don't know what Hoid is, but it's possible he's one of those. So Zahel described Renarin as the son of the most powerful human on this, and then he cuts off. Now that's a really weird way to describe someone if you are also a human from this world. It's pretty clear from that to Zahel, first of all, he probably does not view himself as a human. He's sort of viewing humans externally. And secondly, he is someone who is aware of other worlds. So he's like, oh yeah, he's the son of the most powerful human on this world. And that's not a thing you say unless you have some idea of there being perhaps more powerful humans on other worlds. So my current bet is that Zahel has something to do with the whole Hoid crew. But he could also be like a herald or something, like one of the heralds, like Taln, who also appears here. So I don't know what the hell's deal is, but something definitely is. And related to that, there is a picture. One of the like sketches in between the chapters is a recovered page from Shallan's sketchbook, which someone recovered from the bottom of the ocean. someone called Naj. And Naj clearly describes on his notes on that sketchbook that he recovered it from the bottom of the Rosharan Ocean, which again clearly marks Naj as someone who is not Rosharan. Like, he has awareness of other worlds and would describe this ocean as specifically Rosharan. And whoever he is writing to is either Hoid himself or one of Hoid's friends / pursuers. So we are getting more and more of that whole group that Hoid is a part of. Yeah, so that little detail is something I noticed. And is there anything else? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything else I want to talk about here necessarily. Oh yeah, aside from the fact that the Shattered Plains are obviously the ruins of Urithiru. That's really blatant. Like, the actual physical planes are the ruins of Urithiru. The book is not subtle about that, even though it hasn't been confirmed yet. So I just want to point out that I'm aware of that fact now. So yeah, I guess I'll see you next time when we hopefully see what the hell the Parshendi are going to do with their storm form. Which I'm pretty sure Eshonai is now under Odium's control, which is not great. Or at least the control of the Voidbringers. So not looking forward to the dark turn the Parshendi story is going to take soon. But also looking forward to it in a different way, because it's going to be cool and interesting to read about. Yeah. See you next time.